voting is finished exactly 47 minutes ago. Germans are quicker than Brits, but there are a couple of things that are unclear. In general, it is almost as predicted. It is almost entirely like predicted, which is quite unusual. I think that the polls got it quite so right. I think turnout, because that's quite something, it's 84%. Compare that to 52 in Britain, the last one. This election is hugely important for a number of reasons, of course. I'm going to show you now quickly the results. Go there. It's still not the final result, and there's an interesting discrepancy, as you'll see, from different companies putting different polls forward. So this is the ARD, which is the first public state TV, channel number 1. The interesting thing, I mean, the CDU, CSU, on the right here is the winner, clearly not as high as predicted in between. You know, they were up to 32%. They're now 28.9, 29%, but it's roughly, so they've won in terms of numbers. The AfD, 19.7, SPD, 16.1, Greens, all relatively as predicted. The interesting bits come here then. Linke, 8.6%, tripled since in the last few weeks. And here's the crucial one, FDP, the Liberal Democrats, 4.9%. And the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, 4.8%, which means those two, FDP and BSW, are not in parliament according to this calculation, which is channel number 1. Switch over to channel number 2, they're in. So they're both in 5%. The 5% hurdle is, of course, it is important because it is, you know, the checks and balances to keep out rubble and keep out troublemakers, the left mainly, but the right also. So small parties are not supposed to get into German parliament, and so they've created these the 5% hurdle. So according to the second channel, those two are in. According to the first channel, they're out. So that will matter in terms, of course, the distribution of numbers of MPs, etc., and who can govern with who, crucially. Now you'll see from, this is the Spiegel website, the Spiegel, very liberal establishment website, and you can see they've done possible calculations here, who could govern with who. And you notice, the Greens, and you know, it's all, most likely outcome is Black and sort of CDU and Social Democrats, so conservative Social Democrats. So that's possible. That's possible with the FDP, if it's in or not, depending. Here in this one, you know, if FDP, the Liberal Democrats, and the Sarah Wagenknecht alliance are out, then the Conservatives have to form a coalition with the Social Democrats and another partner. If they're in, if they're in, oh no, they do in both occasions, sorry. Okay, so here, if they're out, correct. If they're out, then Social Democrats and Conservatives can form a coalition by themselves. And if those two parties are in, then you have to get a party on board, either the Greens or the Liberal Democrats. So it'll look like a grand coalition, GroKo it's called in German. But you'll see that there's no blue. So they don't even consider the opportunity and the possibility that the AfD could govern and could be part of any coalition. So that's not even part of the calculations, which is I think very realistic, and we've had discussions about that, and I'm sure we'll have it tonight. I think whatever outcome there will be, one thing is already certain, and I think it is certain in my understanding, is the AfD will not be part of a coalition government. This is it's not, you know, if you, I mean, you know, never say never to anything can happen, etc. But it is, I think if you think that's even likely in the near future, I'm afraid I don't think you know Germany very well, and you don't know Germans very well. You could say that the recent attempt to test the water, perhaps if it was a recent attempt to test the water by the Conservatives, who relied on the AfD for a vote in parliament, that went so badly that if that was a test, and some people think he did, Christian Merz, who will be the new chancellor, did try that as a test to try out how people would react to working with the AfD, either as a minority government or even as a coalition. The reaction was so overwhelming, scandalous, and totally over the top. The Brandmauer, the firewall has fallen, etc. If that was an attempt to test the water, they more than burned their toes, and they still won, but they did go down from about 32% expected to 28%. So it has made a difference. I think I'm gonna leave this on the screen so comrades can look at this a bit more, the results. In general, this is I should say one other thing, that things could also change a bit more, even more than this, because complicated German electoral system means and some little parties are trying to do this. They're trying to win 3 directly elected seats, directly elected MPs. If they are successful, the small parties, in getting 3 MPs directly elected in their constituencies by having a majority, then all the numbers for that particular party would be counted, and the 5% hurdle is not necessary. So there is even a possibility that the BSW, the Sarah Wagenknecht alliance, might get in, even if they don't jump the 5% hurdle. That's how the Linke Party got into parliament last year. There's also a right-wing party, Freie Wähler, free voters. They have tried and specifically to get into parliament that way, because they know they're not going to get the 5%. There's also been a radical reform of the electoral system. The number of MPs have been dramatically cut from over 730 to 630. So if you see figures that say minus so-and-so MPs, you have to keep that in mind. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. In general, this was not a happy election, to put it mildly. It was one dominated by pessimism, by people being very worried, when you ask them, when they're asked in polls, are you happy about how things are going? And it's a very negative mood in the country. It's a negative atmosphere. The AfD, although it will not be in government, the Daily Telegraph had a commentary as the editorial where they're saying at least for 10 years they won't be in government. I think that's pushing it a bit. But I do think, in or out, to be honest, it hardly matters. The AfD is the real winner, because they have moved politics to the right massively over the last 12 months. Every single party, bar Die Linke, has moved to the right, particularly on the issue on migration. We've had articles in the Weekly Worker on that. The famous Brandmauer, the firewall, has been plucked out of the ground and has been moved to the right by miles, and every party has tagged along. This is, the attempt to manage migration is, and that's just an aside, is from capitalism's point of view, of course, entirely irrational as a system. It needs cheap labor, it needs migration, particularly in a country with such a negative birth rate. So German economy, German capitalism does need migrations, but populism and electoralism trumps that, and individual capitalists and individual petty bourgeois especially, they have jumped onto that anti-migration bandwagon for sure. The Donald Trump and Elon Musk certainly have tried to influence things, and I think they actually have, but perhaps not in the way that seems obvious at first. I think what it has done, that they've sanctioned the AfD, if you will. They've made it into trying to make them part of the establishment, etc. That's not happened in Germany. And just because Trump says you can go with the AfD, I like them, does not mean that German politicians will do so. As I mentioned earlier on, it's just not on the agenda at the moment at all. If anything, now a coalition between the Conservatives and the Social Democrats is of course, it was more likely before because of the turnout, etc. But I think Trump has actually pushed them together somewhat. So there won't be an attempt to do anything else but a grand coalition. I think they've both been understanding, both parties, the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, understand why Trump is pushing for the AfD. It's aimed at weakening the European Union. The AfD wants out of European Union. It wants to abolish the euro, etc. And Trump has been very keen on making Europe weak again. Of course, using the opposite word, making Europe great again. But actually, it's an attempt to hold off the decline of US-led imperialism and reformulate US hegemony. And we're witnessing it at the moment, aren't we? The attempt to change the Ukraine narrative, and isn't it quite funny? You know, you say for years, you know, Zelensky is not the friend of anybody, and you know we should be more critical, and suddenly the president of the United States also says the same things. They're just changing their tune from one week to the next. The good guys become the bad guys, and vice versa. Things are changing very, very quickly. Both parties, both the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, have used the last few days of the election campaign really to gently put two fingers up to Trump when it comes to Ukraine war. They're both blowing from the same trumpet. We want, you know, we're going to support Ukraine. We're going to carry on being the biggest financial and military supporter in Europe. We continue to support Zelensky, you know, to the end, etc. It's bluster mainly, I suspect, and won't last very long. But dear God, did Germany go through hell to support Zelensky alongside Joe Biden? And, you know, the people are very aware of that in Germany, pumping billions into Ukraine at the expense of the German economy, foregoing cheap gas from Russia, watching on, not saying a peep as the CIA sanctioned bombing of Nord Stream pipeline, coupled with higher interest rates, falling demand for its exports, etc., which will get worse when it comes to the tariffs, etc. Since COVID, a quarter of a million manufacturing jobs have been lost. The recession is not just likely; it seems to be now almost a certainty. It's defined as a negative GDP in 2 consecutive quarters. And still, Olaf Scholz, last few days, the old chancellor, used the last few days of the election campaign to promise that we'll support Ukraine, will even break the famous Schuldenbremse, which is an attempt, you know, it's in the constitution that you have to balance the books, you know, madness, of course, but it was in the constitution, and now we're going to break it to support Ukraine. So this is a poll distinguished, you know, the first poll, the first election since what it really is turning out to be a new era, isn't it, where the transatlantic alliance is being broken apart, where the response now of Germany, powerhouse of Europe, to Trump's attempts to weaken the EU, you know, the response of Germany will be crucial. Both you know, the Conservatives and the SPD are united, and I think that's why they will be having no problem forming a grand coalition, united in, you know, saying at least they want to make the European Union as strong as possible, to stand up to Trump, but also to Russia and China. Will they do it though properly? Well, we know, we've discussed it before, if they really were to stand up, you know, they'd have to discuss things like a proper joint army, a joint government, etc. For the time being, that ship has probably sailed, but it might be revived, that you know, effort that was interrupted previously in the face of Trumpian tariffs and threats. So just like Trump has pushed the Conservatives and the SPD together, maybe he pushes Europe forward, unintended consequence or something. In any case, the era of Friedrich Merz, the new, I think I called him Christian earlier, sorry, Friedrich Merz, the new chancellor, would be very difficult to the very relatively comfy chancellorship of Angela Merkel and Helmut Kohl before that. This will be a very hostile in terms of migration, but it will also be very, very interesting to see what they're doing about Europe. This will be the main thing on the agenda now, and Ukraine, of course. So the weakening economy and the support for what looks now an entirely pointless war in Ukraine are, of course, a crucial part of why the AfD has done so well. And just quickly wanted to look at that. Yes, on the surface about migration, and that was certainly the last, bar the last few days since Trump, the weeks before that, the months before that, were all about migration. But that is, of course, a much deeper, that's just surface, goes much deeper, the roots to the decline of capitalism and the feeling of a lack of control that many people feel. What the hell are those above doing? So, the 20% of Germans are not fascists. I don't even think they're particularly right-wing. There's been a lot of crossover between AfD voters and the Sarah Wagenknecht Bündnis, and I think the Sarah Wagenknecht Bündnis is now, looks like it's out, but the AfD is of course the real thing. So why vote for the slightly lefty version when you can have a proper right-wing version? So, but they have, of course, amongst them proto-fascists, no doubt, and a lot of nutcases and people who are doing dodgy, saying dodgy things, and at home they're posing with Hitler uniforms and that kind of crap. But as a party, they will make an attempt, and they're halfway there to become more pro-establishment and look normal. We're just the party of the little people, and they've had some success in that. It's not, I don't think it's fascism. I know we've had a discussion earlier today in another meeting about, is fascism really, can you still define it in the way that we defined it in the 30s? Is it really just about, an unresolved revolutionary situation with, do you need to have a strong working class movement that needs to be crushed in order to have fascism? Is fascism really needed to resolve that revolutionary situation? Is it really when the old ruling class cannot rule anymore? I'm sure. I mean, Trump, nobody's opposing him. There's nothing challenging his whatever he wants to do, he's going to do now. There's certainly no working class standing up to that. And yet, of course, this right-wing character, right-wing populism, not just with Trump, but throughout Europe, certainly has a different character than what we've seen before. So it's quite right for us to look into this more. In any case, even if we call them fascists, not call them fascists, they are dangerous right-wing populists, and of course we stand up to them. But I think it's important to say that there's not 20% of Germans are fascists now, or even particularly right-wing extremists, etc. They often has to do, as I said, with the Ukraine war, which is clearly now being exposed as an absolute waste of money, human life, everything, and still they're pursuing it. Both the new government will be pursuing it, for how long we'll see. But it's clear, it's not surprisingly that so many people will look at the government and think, what the hell are you doing? You're still pumping money into it. Well, I haven't got enough money to send my child to kindergarten, etc. Things like that has given rise to the AfD as well. There has been a huge debate, as comrades will know, about the so-called firewall, which in reality is nothing but an attempt to show that all good liberals stand up to the right, while at the same time, of course, they're implementing many of the policies exactly being put forward by the right, at least around migration. The Greens did it. If there's any illusions about the Greens being an alternative, they demand that all new migrants should have mental health checks, not in order to get proper healthcare facilities, I would have thought, but to keep them out, of course. So they're blowing from the same trumpet, as well as being, of course, extremely pro-Ukraine war. Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance is interesting. When it was launched a year ago, roughly 18 months ago, it was at 20% in the polls. Everybody thought, oh, the Linke is buggered, and now the Sarah Wagenknecht is hovering up all those disenchanted, little people, etc. But in the last few weeks, she's really overplayed it, The worst thing about it is I cannot believe she does believe the shite she comes out with. She is one of the most cleverest people, and I've met her and I've known her for 30 years. She's in politics. nobody changes quite like that. It was pure populism, asking, demanding a referendum on migration to cut down, a totally unconstitutional referendum. That was a big thing. And we must have a referendum, which is not even possible, to cut down immigration from 500,000 to 50,000. So that's really, I think, coming out with shit like that has really cost her a lot of support. So she's an absolute populist par excellence, but she really overplayed that. She did leave the Linke Party a year ago because she was getting very impatient with, quite rightly, the Linke's mealy-mouthed support for Ukraine. That had a terrible position, Die Linke, led by ex-SWP member Janine Wiesler, who was just doing her job, enforcing some of the most ridiculous positions on Ukraine. When they didn't attend a demonstration against the Ukraine war because some right-wingers might show up, Sarah Wagenknecht basically left over that, and they did have a terrible position. This also that was linked, of course, with the apparent lack of success for the Linke, which did not look like getting into parliament at all until a few weeks ago. So she left because it would have been bad for her career. So she would have to argue a shit position, and you're not even getting back into parliament. There were, of course, a few other right-wingers. There's a letter in the Weekly Worker this week explaining that the departure of a few right-wingers in Berlin, some very prominent right-wingers in Berlin, has opened up some space in the Linke as well. These were people who have run, the Berlin government, the regional one, for 7-8 years, and in a way indistinguishable from the Social Democrats, enforcing cuts, closing libraries, attacking the working class left, right, and center. Typical behavior. So when they left, of course, there was no surprise that the departure was linked to or anti-Semitism charges, which is, of course, it's not quite as the Palestine movement is not quite as big as it is here. So the anti-Semitism weapon is not quite yet as moved as much as it is has been in Britain. Although when they wield it, it's certainly more. It comes from the state far more. So you get demonstrators attacked, etc., and arrested for being pro-Palestine, etc. But that this departure was orchestrated around anti-Semitism really is no surprise. I have to say both the Linke and both Sarah Wagenknecht are absolute rubbish on Palestine. 2 states, there's 2 sides to every story, and we should have 2 states. They're still going on about that. So those 2 departures helped the revival of Die Linke, by moving to the left a little bit. There was no pressure on the Linke leadership to follow that migration trap to the right. There was no pressure to say something about, we should close borders, or we should also enforce migration attempts. There was no. It finally come out. It can finally come out with saying clearly no weapons exports to Ukraine and Israel, which is also slightly new. It's always had something like that, but now it sticks to it. Although individual parliamentarians and individual right-wingers who remain in the Linke are still pushing against that, but so far not successfully. The Linke defines itself, and it has always. It's just there's always been a discrepancy between the Linke program and what their leaders say and do. But it defines itself as an internationalist party. Crucially, it has and a socialist party, democratic socialism, which is the word socialism is not mentioned once by Sarah Wagenknecht, although she's an old-time communist. That we don't talk about that. Typical broad left front attempt, and I have to say I am very happy if they don't get in. They really don't deserve. She deserves to be punished for the crap she's come out with recently. It is very George Galloway nationalism. It's focused on what is good for all of Germany because it'll trickle down to the little people, etc. So no idea about socialism, etc. Wagenknecht is very keen to govern. She's always put herself forward to will form coalitions with almost anybody, apart from the AfD. Sarah was very keen to put herself as part of the firewall against the rising right. Of course, she's been she's been treated exactly like the AfD. Nobody wants to do with her. The Linke, as I said, on the other hand, has, for the first time that I am aware, stood on a clear commitment to remain in opposition. It is, from its inception, the attempt to govern was always they were very, very keen. That's, of course, if you're a responsible politician, of course you take responsibility, and that includes standing in any government. It wasn't even discussed, but they've now come out and said their election manifesto has the title "Alle wollen regieren, wir wollen verändern." Everybody wants to govern, we want to change things. Of course, that could be just PR waffle, but it certainly was very well timed and very well received. So it's good to see there is some space on the left still, and that they get an 8.59% shows that there is a space for that. Funnily enough, by putting themselves forward as an opposition party for the first time, they've become potentially, and we've seen it in the Spiegel graphic, they've potentially become a potential coalition partner for the first time by saying we won't go into coalition. They wouldn't stick to it. As soon as somebody offered them a coalition participation, they would go for that. Still, it won't happen soon, but it's going to happen sooner than the AfD joining a national government, I suspect. I just wanted to, let me just see if there's any updates. Since I last checked, no, it's still a question of, oops, hold on a second. Oh, where's it gone? Hold on a second, I'm just checking if we can see if FDP and RD, no, it's still one. Channel 1 has Sarah Wagenknecht in and FDP out, and Channel 2 has them in. So I think that's one of the things we'll have to wait till tomorrow to see. Just one last thing I wanted to share quickly, because that's quite heartening, is here. The youth vote, and that's from beginning of February, a couple of weeks ago. So you can see between 18 and 29-year-olds, the picture is not great, but slightly better. So you've got the Greens. They're still, I really don't get it why, but they are still seen as a sort of left organization. I did my own polling of friends and comrades I know from before, not so much comrades, but friends and colleagues. And Greens are top for them. They still, and for the reasons that they're left wing, that they are, taking climate change seriously, etc. And the issue of the war doesn't come into it for many people. But Linke, amongst lots of my friends' children, is the party they would vote for, and at 19%. Again, Sarah Wagenknecht Bündnis here at 4%. And you know why? It is a party of, trying to appeal to sort of older East German little people, but they said, why wouldn't they vote for the AfD instead, which is also pretty high at 17% amongst young people. So not a thoroughly positive picture, but slightly more positive than the national picture. So yeah, it's going to be it was a very, very exciting election, but the outcome is very, very boring. A grand coalition of social democrats and conservatives. I am speculating about the European Union, and I actually don't think I can. I don't know if they're going to stand up or not. I don't know if they're going to move European integration forward now a notch and put two fingers up to Trump. Will they? They're saying they are, but I think that's mainly talk before the election. So who knows? It's just everything is up in the air in that respect. It's certainly a period in flux. I suspect there will be a move towards more European integration again. But I can't see on that. From the beginning of the reunification, it was the East Germans considered themselves as the losing side, didn't they? And they were. I mean, they had the worst economy, worst jobs, etc., etc. I think there is a huge sentiment still in East Germany, and that was reflected always in higher votes for Die Linke and the PDS before that. You know, they did much better, much better in East Germany. It was an East German party, of course, as opposed to the AfD. But I think this identification of as us against them is still very strong in East Germany. That was never resolved. You know, the unification with its the winners bringing the losers back on board. I think it's always been that kind of sentiment, and it's not gotten rid of. And you know, they're a bit like Trump, aren't they? They know how to speak to those who feel left out. Who feel like the losers in society, who feel like we are the little ones against those on top, and you know, what the hell are they doing up there? And despite the AfD, yes, being mainly a petty bourgeois reflection, reflecting or what you call it, fighting for petty bourgeois interests mainly, I do think they attract a lot of poorer sections of the working class who feel left out, not dissimilar to what's happening in the US. In terms of, I quite agree with you that it's not the anti-immigration stuff. Yes, nobody's been trying to explain what's wrong with migration, actually, apart from the Linke. You know, they've sort of made half, but also very emotional. You know, it's nasty to be mean to people like that, rather than actually explaining it. Capitalism fucking needs migration. You know, that they don't do that as well. But it's been very much linked to all the various attacks recently. You know, and I mean, you know, I'm not prone to conspiracy theories, but fuck me, every time, you know, I mean, there's been so many of these individual attacks by asylum seekers in Germany, you know, it does, and every time something like that happened, the vote for the AfD shoots up, and they're arguing along those. That's you know, there's 4 or 5 attacks there's been recently, and rape, etc., and that's been blown out of all proportion, and I think that's what was the fear factor, but not economically. And that they think economically people do link it to Ukraine, though. You know, they don't actually think that the migrants are making them poor. It's just they don't like them because they're terrorists, and they you know, and they shoot us, and yes, culture war as well. But it is more about the terror. It's certainly totally changed since Angela Merkel brought in a million Syrians. Do you remember that? That was like everybody's wonderful. That's German culture at its best, etc. All the parties welcomed it, and it's now like what the most stupid thing anybody's ever done, you know. And most of these Syrians are really well integrated. They've been working full time. They got the right to work, etc. You know, so there's you can't argue economically because it's so obviously not true. So it is about these, I think, individual terror and the culture of fear, and you know, it's irrational. It's entirely irrational, but it works.
This is this is a sort of point addressed to comrades' uncertainties about what's going on here. I think it works. I mean, I think it is about economics, but it's about economics at a lower level. Yeah. And the lower level is that I said this more than once before. Capitalism, the claim that markets tend towards equilibrium is false. Because the claim that markets tend towards equilibrium is false, the more marketization you have, the more you need, on the one hand, the collectivity, which is the strong nation state at the macro level, and the more you need at the micro level, the collectivity, which is the family. And then the consequence of that is that neoliberal cuts in welfare expenditure naturally tend indirectly to produce Christianist, Islamist, far-right nationalist forms of Bonapartism, and culture wars both around family and sexuality and around race and nation. And the extreme version of that, of course, is the what happened in Germany in 1931-33, in the sense that it's I think generally understood that what triggered the actual victory of Hitler was the determination of the conservative governments at the time to avoid falling into a repeat of the hyperinflation. And in consequence, massive, causing instead 30-40% unemployment. But the point is that this is an indirect. It's not a sort of it's straightforward, and we can say the economics is wrong. But that isn't why it works. It works because the economics drives fears about the nation and fears about the family, and the fears about the nation and fears about the family are indirectly driven by public expenditure cuts and so on, and underlying that by the underlying we're in the shit economically, and again, it's sort of it's how should I put it? It's this sort of politics is rarely it comes in government. It can be connected with boom, as was the case in Germany in the mid 1930s, but basically because rearmament funded by the United States allowed driving the economy forward. More generally, however, the downswing of the economy on the long scale tends to produce the politics of irrationalism, whereas the upswing of the economy on the long scale tends to produce the politics of scientism and positivism and everything's going well, reform, and stuff like that. And that seems to me, I mean, it's the comment I think in the Telegraph that and in that Germany's election shows Germany becoming normalized, in a sense, is hey, that's this is something which is happening across the whole of Europe and in the United States, and happened ages ago. You know, the Modi government in India is a government of a far right party which ran a fascist militia for many years and has actually continued episodically to organize terrorist attacks against Muslims. So in that sense, that's all I'm going to say. It's just I don't think we have to be too hung up on the actual economics of migration and so on. I think it works in a different way to that. So,
thank you, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. That merely because people aren't or parties aren't laying it out economically, and I think Tina, you said that the linker is just saying be nice to people because they're just like us, or whatever the particular message is. That underlying that there is a particular dynamic. You spoke about De Linke being in government, presumably on a junior basis in Berlin, presiding over cuts. So it's a society under pressure, isn't it? And we're not seeing the working class asserting itself through its organized strength. So my own feeling. I'd be very, I mean, I don't believe the Telegraph for one moment that everything's safe for the next 10 years. I mean, comrades were asking, you know, what do you think about what's going to happen in the United States in terms of the economy? Who the hell knows? What you can see is that things are very hard to predict. What you can see is things are very unstable. And okay, I mean, again, we don't know, but if, and it's a valid question, isn't it, that if Germany, France, Britain decided to back Ukraine in spite of what Trump is saying, again, that leads us to all sorts of what the hell is going to happen. And I'm not going to push it. But what I would say is what appears to be absolutely unthinkable today precisely becomes thinkable tomorrow. There you had J.D. Vance in Munich saying the unsayable such a short time ago. There you've got Trump in the United States. So I'm extremely, I mean, I wouldn't welcome it, obviously not, but I would be extremely cautious of saying, don't worry about AFD for at least another 10 years. I know you're not saying that, Tina, but the Telegraph is. Well, who have we got in heading the government now in Italy? Who's the biggest party in Austria, which isn't a million miles away from Germany? So these things are happening. That is the way at the moment the world is going. And I just did a little, you know, again, it depends on the arithmetic. I'm sure you're right. They will initially go, and maybe they succeed in getting together is it a black, red, green coalition? That sort of works out in terms of the arithmetic. But how much longer can such a coalition survive? We saw precisely that with different arithmetic in that sort of coalition, we've just seen it fall apart. So this is why we've got the snap election. What's to stop it falling apart? As soon as they get it together, what's to stop another snap election? And so I just did a little, I mean, again, this is slightly playing with figures because, of course, we don't know the exact result. But I got to CDU plus AFD, at least one of my calculations was 49%. So, yeah, I wouldn't expect that now. But the question is, how stable in these extremely unstable circumstances where Europe could back Ukraine and therefore could find itself in confrontation with Trump, God help us. What happens then to this coalition? It's not a stable coalition. It's an unstable coalition. And therefore, as we saw in Austria, we had the language of firewalls change to the language of taming. And there's your candidate for taming, Alice Weigel. Is that the right pronunciation? Or Weigel? Weidel. But yeah, she's the ideal, isn't she? Look at her. She's nice. She's a lesbian. How on earth can you accuse her of being a Nazi, as Elon Musk said? So again, none of us know, but it does seem to me that if you can get the ex-fascists, and I do say ex, but if you can get the ex-fascists in as the leading component in Italy, why not get, I mean, again, I wouldn't call them ex-Nazi, but you know what I mean, but the far right in Germany. I think it is, unfortunately, all too thinkable. That doesn't mean that I think that there's Nazism in power. I agree with your take on it. But I would, again, just a final point, I'd also say with the Nazi vote, that it was a very, as these things are, confused vote that would be open to communists, even the official Communist Party, KDP, winning people over. So it's right not to dismiss these people as beyond the pale. We're not going to touch them with a barge pole. We should engage or seek to engage with them. Anyway, enough.
Yeah, I thought I'm going to share quickly something on that because it doesn't need the Greens. Here, Bild-Zeitung, right-wing tabloid. So that's the Conservatives, and with the SPD they get over the required 50%, so they don't need them. Of course, here you could get a coalition between the Conservatives and AFD would easily get over the 50%, easier than the Social Democrats and Conservatives, but not gonna happen this time for sure. And I think it will still some time before that becomes a possibility. In the meantime, I think the AFD will change quite a bit as well and will become more it's almost it is almost the mainstream. There isn't that much that distinguishes them. The position over the European Union will probably be the big difference. On migrants, they were pretty much all singing from the same hymn sheet, but out of the European Union or building up the European Union and linked to, I mean, you only touched on it, yes, but if they are serious about continuing the Ukraine war against the wishes of Trump, I mean, that was utter madness. In that case, yes, you could see all sorts of strange things happening in Germany because the most Germans are against that war and know that it is bloody stupid. And now Donald Trump says it's bloody stupid and started by Zelensky, etc. And you still want to continue it. That kind of obvious sort of discrepancy between what's clearly the right thing to do and what's clearly the government doing the wrong thing could lead to all sorts of things become boiling over really quickly. Interesting little snippet there from Jim Moody, just sent it to me in the meeting. Amongst 18 to 12, so I showed you that quote earlier, how young people are voting, and the BBC has broken it down even further between the different age groups. So between 18 and 24-year-olds, the Linke is ahead with 25% of the vote, where you had AFD at 20, and then the Conservatives 13. In the next bracket, 25 to 34, it's the AFD top with 22%, and then Conservatives and the Greens and the Linke at 16%. So quite a discrepancy between really young people who are, sort of tend to be more on the left, etc., and slightly older people. I quite agree with this that it is the economy, even if it doesn't look like it's the economy. That's the reason often for the right and the populist right becoming quite so popular. It's irrational, etc. But it is an attempt as well to, I guess, look for answers, and the right has easy answers, and that's what we're going for it. But yeah, I don't think these people are lost, or not all of them. I'm sure there's some people in there lost to us, but looking for answers is a good place to start. When I did my little poll amongst colleagues and friends, there were a few people just we have to stick to the SPD no matter what. We don't have to change things. We just stick with things. That's the right thing to do. Whereas a lot of other people are thinking about it, at least trying to work it out, rather than just go for the easy answers. AFD and Sarah Wagenknecht, yes, they both do much better in East Germany than they do in West Germany, and that's sort of along the lines of what Mike explained there as well. The economy is even worse in the East. It's even harder to get a decent job and pay your bills, considering how interest rates have shot up, energy costs have shot up, etc. So they're doing even worse than normal Germans, in West Germany. That is the question, isn't it? It is. I think it is having to justify the last 3 years of spending billions and billions on the Ukraine war, and preparing everybody for it, and just explaining why we have to borrow more money to send more weapons, etc., and having all these arguments about can you send towers or not, and what kind of weapons can we send, etc., and then finally going for it. I mean, Chancellor Scholz really had to be pushed by the Greens, who were very gung-ho, and had to be pushed into supporting the war. Now they've done it, they're supposed to just stop. I think they will stop. I think they know, as you explained quite rightly, that the economy has suffered massively, and that's really a part of why the economy is so bad, is the Ukraine war. But I think they'd be looking for an exit strategy, and I suspect it's also not just about Ukraine. It's more about trying to weaken the European Union and trying to ideally break it apart, etc. By supporting AfD, by supporting anti-EU parties in Europe. I mean, Trump is clearly putting two fingers up to Europe, as a bloc. He wants to. It's up to him. He wants to break it apart and do individual deals, etc. He's got no interest in a strong Europe. So I think that is part of why they are now, pretending that we have to keep the Ukraine war going. I suspect it's about other things as well. Keep the EU going, and that's our in at the moment. But there are other issues will come to the front, I suspect. I mean, I'm not one of them, but I guess they're looking for an exit strategy on Ukraine, while also urgently discussing amongst themselves. And you could just imagine how their meetings go. What the fuck are we going to do now? How are we going to oppose what Trump is doing? Are we going to move forward? How are we going to move forward, etc., etc.? So it's I think the European Union is in some disarray at the moment.
The question is that with the AfD, it can precisely say this is in the interests of Germany to go with the world hegemon, Donald Trump. Let's settle. Let's get the gas flowing again. Let's give people jobs. Let's, whatever. Okay, I don't know what will happen with the CDU, SDP, however the arithmetic works out. But in terms of what they're saying, at least, they seem to be on a sort of some sort of collision course with Trump. But all I was going to say in that sense is that at least we should try to get our heads around it, that sections of, I don't know what the relationship between the capitalist classes and the AfD, but if you notice, when Le Pen and National Rally were emerging as the biggest party, not bloc, but biggest party in French elections, they immediately opened up negotiations with the equivalent of the CBI and other such business institutions. So I just wouldn't, again, I mean, I would be interested in, one, are there any relationships between the capitalist class, not individual bonkers capitalists? I'd be very surprised if there were, but I'd also be very surprised if the government doesn't do your, let's get the hell out of our involvement with Ukraine, let's bend to the United States. I would be very surprised if sections of business didn't start backing AfD, because they're not going to be backing Die Linke, they're not going to be backing the Sarah a lot. Anyway.